Welcome, Sovereign Lovers.
Hello, happy Sovereign Sunday.
Sound like you're losing your voice.
A
What have
little
you
bit.
been doing?
I've been up to so many things this weekend.
All right. Well, welcome back. This is our second episode of season 3. We are really excited about our Sovereign Lovestream reboot, and we hope you guys are going to be enjoying our new version of the podcast. We are going to be doing a lot more guests this time and a lot more experts. But today we want to talk about our mushroom ceremony from last year, last October 7th, actually, which turned out to be a fateful day. We decided to do a mushroom ceremony. And we're going to talk about how we summoned Dionysus, the ancient Greek god of ecstatic experience, and the lessons that we learned about ecstatic experiences from this ceremony.
Yeah, and all the ways in which those lessons have kind of continued to expand. And I guess, honestly, this is a little bit of a testament to the power of integration.
Yeah, absolutely. It's over a year later, and we are still really integrating and continuing to learn the lesson like over and over, applied to every area of our lives. So I want to give a little bit of background about why we decided to do this to begin with. So it all started with this book by Sophie Strand, The Flowering Wand, Rewilding the Sacred Masculine. And when I read this book, Sophie talks about the myths of Dionysus and how Dionysus was sort of a feminist hero of his time. And the Dionysian cults were mostly women followers of Dionysus. So, you have to kind of put yourself in the time period where in ancient Greece, women were essentially property. They were seen as being great for procreation and for housekeepers, and I guess, I think a lot has changed. I don't want to say a lot hasn't changed. There is still some of that left over even today in our culture. But Dionysus was calling these women out of their servitude and oppression, out of the cities and into the wilderness to partake in ecstatic experience, right? Inviting them to live their best, most authentic, most ecstatic lives. And the legends range from ecstatic drunken orgies, according to the Greek and Roman authorities, that eventually banned these rituals because they were seen as destroying society. And so they banned these ecstatic experiences. So Dionysus, a little bit of history for those who don't know about Dionysus. Dionysus is I prefer to call him the god of ecstatic experience. The Romans tried to smear him by calling him the god of drunkenness and wine. But in this book, which is really an incredible book, The Immortality Key by Brian C. Marescu, and he goes really deep into the history. Brian actually visited the Vatican archives, and he really dug deep in his research about the Dionysian rituals and the sources of them. He found some really incredible parallels between Dionysus and Jesus. My kind of interpretation of Dionysus and Jesus after reading this and a bunch of other books and our ecstatic experience is that Dionysus was teaching a very ecstatic path, and Jesus was teaching a more ascetic path. But they really had the core message. Both of them were really teaching the core message. There's even some evidence in here that John, the Apostle John, was probably coming out of a Dionysian cult, that he may have been a follower of Dionysus, and that the concept of Jesus is an evolution of Dionysus. So in his book, the research he found was that most likely these cults were drinking beer or wine that was laced with ergot, which is a bacteria that produces what we would know today as LSD or acid. So most likely, and I don't know if they were intentionally cultivating this or it just happened by accident, but the drunkenness that the Romans described was actually people having psychedelic experiences. So now imagine this. Dionysus is calling women out of their servitude, out of this like mundane life where they're really repressed and not allowed to live these ecstatic experiences. And Dionysus is holding space for them. He's holding court for them. He's creating a safe container for these women to have that full expression. And like I think I had started to say before and I didn't finish my sentence, the myths talk about everything from ecstatic orgies to the women tearing animals limb from limb and eating the raw flesh and wearing the skins, right? So there's no judgment in whatever expression these women wanted to express. Dionysus had no judgment of it. He held space for all of it. All of your feelings were valid when it came to Dionysus. Mm-hmm. So, this is what Sophie Strand explores in The Flowering Wand, this concept of Dionysus being a safe masculine space to hold space for all feminine. So now putting this in a tantric lens, which is where we're coming from, is really through studying Tantra, the idea that we all contain a masculine and feminine energy within us, right? The yin and the yang, if you're familiar, that comes out of Eastern mysticism and philosophy as well, which is related to Taoist Tantra. So this concept of us, each person carrying masculine and feminine energies in them. So for me, I have been having trouble holding space for my internal feminine. I tend to want to judge my emotions and suppress the ones that I don't think are valid, right? And sometimes we experience this also in relationship, right? If I can't hold space for my own emotions, then I'm not going to be able to hold space for the emotions of Vanessa. And we have talked about this a lot in our podcast over the past couple of years, because this was really a big problem for me. So after reading The Flowering Wand, I really wanted to call in the energy of non-judgment, being able to hold the polarity of the full spectrum of all emotion, right? Whether it's an ecstatic orgy or tearing animals limb from limb, right? Like from the sublime to the horrific, really, right? To be able to hold space for all of it, right? Now, I'm glad that you're not trying to tear animals limb from limb. Our pets maybe would not appreciate that either. But for me to be able to really embody the energy of Dionysus, where I can hold space for even the darkest, most irrational, and maybe wild expressions of your emotions, right? That's how I'm applying this here. So kind of the idea that we've taken from indigenous culture and a lot of the ancient spiritual traditions is this idea of calling in the energies, invoking deities, which really most of these ancient cultures didn't actually view them as gods as we would think of them today, post-monotheistic culture. They really thought of them more as archetypes, like Jung, and energies that could be invoked by summoning or calling on these deities, right? Do you want to talk a little bit about the Toltecs and the Aztecs, how they kind of viewed that?
Yeah, in the Aztec tradition, the word Teo, which is what many people interpret as God, is really just energy. So what we're talking about are energies that become personified for storytelling. It's a lot easier to hear a story of a warrior god that survives the night, conquers the night, as opposed to talking about the energy of overcoming darkness, right? When there's a whole story attached to it, we're able to see it in multitudes. We're able to see it as a nuanced experience, as opposed to just one particular energy of good versus evil, or the energy of war. What does that mean, right? But when we talk about being a warrior, and what you're surviving, what you're overcoming, there's a more nuanced perspective, and you have a clearer visual of what that energy is representing. So in these Aztec traditions, all of these gods are really energies that through storytelling have become personified. And I mean, I think a lot of people, even in the context of Christianity, there are people that believe that Jesus is more of an energy as opposed to a literal human being that was born and, lived out this life. It's possible, but I think there's also the possibility that it was simply an energy.
That's going to ruffle some feathers. I prefer to think of it as he was a living person and he embodied these energies. And so now he's not just a historical figure, but he's also the symbol, the cultural symbol that embodies the energy of Christ consciousness. Sometimes it's called, like compassion, empathy for others, turn the other cheek, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you, love yourself, love God, and love your neighbor as you love yourself. So this is kind of the encapsulation of the Beatitudes, which is the core message of Christ. And was also very much, Dionysus in his myths, he was also very much the same way, challenging. As a matter of fact, some of the stories are really so similar. I forget the ruler of Greece's name at the time that Dionysus challenged. Dionysus was arrested for bringing these women out into the wilderness and doing all these crazy things that the Greeks saw as a threat to their society, a threat to order, a threat to culture and society, right? They wanted to make Greece great again. And they were like, we've got to get rid of Dionysus if we're going to do that. And so they brought him in and they arrest him. And, even reading the banter back and forth between, I want to say it was Tiberius, but I'm not sure, so don't quote me. Reading the banter back and forth, it reminded me of the banter between Jesus and Pontius Pilate, and even Jesus and the religious, the Sadducees and Pharisees, who were constantly challenging his spiritual authority or his knowledge and wisdom. So I feel like there are a lot of parallels. So that is the reason why we decided to summon Dionysus.
And so by summoning, meaning like calling him the energy or the representation of the energy of Dionysus, right? The ability to hold space. The way you were saying, like different cultures summon, we summon in the indigenous traditions, you call in the energies, you call in the directions. And what you're doing is you're summoning the energies that are associated with each direction, with the animals associated, with the jaguar, with the eagle, with the hummingbird. And each one has its own particular energy that you're calling in to support you through this particular experience. So at the time, we were also, I believe you were having a rough period. And as a matter of fact, Carla recommended that you have a funeral service for yourself.
That's right.
And that's when you were like, oh my God, I'm going to have a Dionysus ritual.
Well, in the Immortality Key, one of the things Brian talks about is how the Dionysian rituals were funeral rituals, where people were putting parts of themselves on the altar to die. To make room for whatever energies they wanted to call in. So for me, in this case, I was delving into what are the things that block me? What are the things that make me feel insecure? And that insecurity creates self-defense mechanisms that want to judge. So then when Vanessa would come to me with an emotion, let's say, she's having a feeling about something that I said or did, and she brings this feeling that, when you did that, it makes me feel this way. And I take it personally. I'm like, oh, well, I didn't mean it like that. So that emotion is invalid. So now that I told you I didn't mean it like that, like,
you can stop feeling that way.
Get away from me with that. Don't put that emotion on me, right? Like I had to judge it. Is it right? Is it wrong? Because the other reaction sometimes I would have is, oh my God, I'm such a piece of shit. I can't believe I did that. And I would go into a completely disempowered space. Either way, I was disempowered, but it was just different reactions. Sometimes it was fawn, sometimes it was fight. So putting that part of myself, that insecurity, the feelings, the deep feelings of unworthiness, where if I'm feeling unworthy, then I'm I'm doubting my own intuition. And because I don't have that foundation, then anything she says could trigger me, right? Even if it's just something just as simple as her wanting to share something that she's going through with me, and then me having to take that personally. Does that make sense the way I've explained that? Do you want to expound on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think what ends up happening is that when we're not in tune with our own emotions, we don't have that foundation. Right. So what was happening is you were suppressing your emotions, and then there's a resentment built up. Well, I suppress my emotions. Why can't you suppress your emotions? And so now I have a big emotion, and Danny's like, well, I can't hold space because I don't hold space for my own emotions. Nobody holds space for my emotions. My emotions aren't even real. Right. Because these are the stories that at some point you heard or grew up with, and that became kind of the baseline for how emotions were handled. And now suddenly I'm showing up with my big emotions, and Danny's like, no, emotions aren't real. Just,
if I correct your facts, then that should fix your emotions.
Right. And that always led to disaster.
So based on Brian's research, I wrote a funeral mass for this insecure, unworthy part of myself. And one day, October 7th, 2023, we sat down with, we had invited another friend to participate with us. I took 6 grams of, I believe it was penis envy was the strain. And how many grams did you take?
3.5.
3.5. So generally speaking, 3.5 grams is considered a breakthrough dose, and 5 grams is considered a hero's dose. So what we've always had really powerful experiences, just even on 3.5 grams. But I wanted to push my boundaries a little bit. That was the first time I had ever gone past 3.5 grams. So I took 6 grams, and we performed this ritual. And I had written out a whole mass, and I read through the mass and put those parts of me on the altar, and called in the energy of Christ, called in the energy of Dionysus, called in the energy of non-judgment and the calm confidence to be able to hold space for a wide range of emotions. Again, first within myself, because if I'm denying my own emotions, then I'm going to deny the emotions of other people, right? We're just reflections of each other. So if something that Vanessa is feeling triggers me, it's because it's a feeling that I'm suppressing in myself. So those were the energies I called in.
Yes.
Yeah. So now talk about your experience.
Okay. So from my perspective, our friend and I were just supporting Danny in this experience. He actually said, oh, I'd love to have this Dionysus ritual and have my maenads present. And I had no idea what a maenad was, and neither did our friend. And we quickly looked it up, like, okay, what does that mean? And it was like, oh, the female consorts of Dionysus, and they were mad women. And we were like, oh, yeah, that's us. Totally mad women, of course. Hi, Rena. And so, I was like, sure, let's do it. I'm always curious to see how far I can go down the rabbit hole myself. And as we performed the ritual, and I was watching Danny perform this ritual and lay down by the altar. And at some point I was like, oh my God, this looks like you're laying on, like this is a funeral bed right now with like the altar behind you. It was really powerful to see that, to witness him put himself on the altar, both physically and symbolically. And I noticed that he and my friend were both already in it. Like they were definitely feeling the effects of the mushrooms. And I was like, this is strange. I don't really feel anything right now. And I feel like I'm pretty sensitive. I tend to feel psychedelic journeys pretty strongly. And so we were just having this conversation, and I was like, you know what, let me just get up and go to the bathroom. And I walked into the bathroom, and I was wearing a bodysuit, so I like took off my bodysuit to use the bathroom. And when it came time to put it back on, I was so uncomfortable. I suddenly could not put my clothes back on, and I thought, okay, maybe I need to take a shower. I feel very uncomfortable in my skin and my body. And I started to panic a little bit. And now we've been working with psychedelics for many years. And so I am very well aware of what can be considered a bad trip. I have, we have these tools available. We understand the process. And so I did have a moment where I said, oh my God, I'm going to have them call an ambulance for me because I'm losing my mind right now. And as soon as a thought came into my mind, I was like, okay, I'm having a bad trip. I'm going through the difficult part of the trip in this moment. And so I took off all my clothes. I took off my jewelry. I took off my watch. I had a bracelet. I ripped the bracelet off. I just broke the silver. It just was all over the floor. And I had the thought of having to walk back out to the room where they were completely naked. And I was afraid to do that. Now, a little bit of backstory into this is that a few years ago, when I started my healing journey and started my journey of re-indigenization, of connecting with my indigenous ancestry, both of my parents were born and raised in Mexico, so I am of Mexican ancestry, and I started connecting with my Aztec and Toltec traditions, and I came across Sergio Magaña, who is an author of Toltec and Aztec traditions. And I took a few classes with him, including a class on learning to interpret the Aztec calendar. And after taking his class, I ended up getting in touch with his mentor, who then led a group of us through a course that lasted probably a couple of months, where we went really deep into the Aztec calendar and Aztec history and mythology. It was really, honestly, it was really intense. It was like a lot of quantum physics, which was really shocking. And through the Aztec calendar, learning to interpret the Aztec calendar, I looked up the energies that were influencing me at the time of my birth. And we all have an energy that influences our conscious mind, our tonal, and an energy that influences our subconscious mind, which is our nahual. And both of those energies for me were the jaguar. And so our teacher Hugo said, when your nahual is the jaguar, when your spirit animal or your subconscious guide is the jaguar, at some point the jaguar will appear to you, and you have to let it devour you. And so I've always talked about how shadow work is my love language. And
can I ask a question? What is the devouring? Why do you have to let the jaguar devour you?
Well, because it is the shadow energy, right? It's surrendering to that shadow energy, becoming one with shadow energy, just your shadow work, especially when those energies are so influential in your life. You can resist it, and when you're in that space of resistance, life is difficult for you because your shadow is coming to you over and over again, and you're just resisting and resisting. It becomes a difficult experience. So the idea of allowing the jaguar to devour you is more like surrendering to that shadow part of yourself so that you can fully integrate. And maybe I think this is probably is true of everybody. It is important and necessary for us to integrate our shadow. But I think when there is so much shadow energy influencing you, it is even more important, I believe. So I was really excited by that idea. I was like, yes, I want to be devoured by a jaguar. That sounds really exciting to me. It made sense. My birth chart made sense to me because I have always been interested in shadow work and the occult and all of these different modalities that exist outside of what is traditional religion. So about a year after that, I was in Mexico at a women's retreat, and I was in a sweat lodge. And so it's completely dark. I was in a sweat lodge with about 13 other women. And I was doing a lot of ancestral healing and releasing in that particular retreat. And during this sweat, at these moments where I was just crying and releasing things, I ended up seeing in my mind's eye, because I'm complete darkness, I saw a jaguar walking towards me. And in that moment, I felt sheer panic. I was like, oh my God, it's coming to me. And I closed my eyes and I turned my face, like shielding myself from it. And it happened so quickly. The reaction was so fast that like within a couple of minutes, I was like, oh my God, I missed my opportunity. I was supposed to let it devour me and I didn't. And I was honestly so disappointed in myself, but also really excited at the fact that the jaguar had appeared to me, because now I felt like, okay, I'm on the right path. I'm moving towards this, and I wasn't ready. So that means I still need to do more shadow work. So here I am. 1 year later, it was also October 2020. Oh no, I'm trying to remember if it was 1 or 2 years later, but it was also in October that I went on that women's retreat. So here I am in this bathroom, freaking out and thinking I need to call an ambulance because I've totally lost my mind. And I suddenly had this panic also of, this is scary. This is really, really dark. This is the darkness that I see people sometimes in the path of spirituality freak out over and say, forget it, I'm going back to organized religion because that is bad. That is too dark for me. And it can be dark. It's very scary to suddenly be in this position where you're confronted with all of your insecurities. I was afraid of walking out into this room completely naked in front of my husband and a close friend of mine who is very body positive, sex positive. I feel like she would consider herself a nudist. And so it wouldn't be weird, I feel. And I knew that logically, but my insecurities were so strong that I was like, I cannot do that. There's no way that I can walk out of this bathroom completely naked. This is no. And so I felt like I was putting my insecurities on the altar in some way with that ask, right? The jaguar was asking me to do that in that moment. That's really what that felt like. And suddenly I was like undecided. I was like, do I ask them to call an ambulance? Do I take a shower? Do I just walk out of here and accept that I have to let these insecurities go? And I felt like I closed my eyes, like everything went black for a couple of seconds. And suddenly I walked out of the bathroom. And even the moment when I opened my eyes and walked out of the bathroom, I felt like an animal. I felt like a jaguar moving through the jungle. I like opened the door and walked out, and it really felt like I was pacing through a jungle, just like moving leaves and stuff. It's so hard, like weird to describe it that way. And then I came out into the room and just said, like, I'm here. And both of them were shocked, like, okay, she's just walked out of the bathroom completely naked. That's interesting. And Danny was like, okay.
I mean, honestly, in my mind, I'm thinking, well, the Dionysian cults, they were having orgies in the woods. Is that what's about to happen right now?
And so Danny said something. One of them asked, like, what happened? And I said, I have no idea what just happened. And I went to lay down. We had mats on the ground. So I lay down on one of the mats. And as soon as I lay down, I put a blanket over myself. And suddenly I just felt waves and waves of pleasure, of ecstatic, orgasmic pleasure. And honestly, I feel like those waves lasted for hours. I think, I mean, we started our ritual probably at around 9 or 10, I would say. And we got home at maybe 4 o'clock in the morning. I was still having these waves suddenly where I felt like just extreme waves of pleasure. So as I was laying down on the mat, suddenly I feel all of this pleasure, and I'm feeling the entire universe pulsating. It felt like the entire universe was the breath, the inhale and the exhale. And every exhale, every separation was all of the war and terror and pain and suffering, and all of the inhale was the love and the oneness and the connection. And so it felt like life itself is the breath. Life itself is ecstatic and orgasmic. Both the suffering, the war, the pain is all part of this. It's one and the same. They are not separate. It is part of the same experience. You can't have the inhale without the exhale. You can't have the exhale without the inhale. So they exist as a unit, and that is the all of existence in and of itself. And so Danny and I have talked, Danny's been doing a lot of videos recently on TikTok about existential kink and this idea of us experiencing some of our traumatic things, the things that we resist as our kink. There is inherent pleasure in those things. And this was a moment where I finally saw it to its fullest extent. That war, suffering, pain were all pleasure as well. And that, yes, in the grand cosmic scene, if you were to just expand your perspective all the way out, you would see it as ecstatic, as orgasmic, as like, oh my God, yeah. When we have these very painful moments, in the moment they feel very painful, but then when you come back into that unity, into that oneness, into that love, into that safety, there's so much more strength in it because you've experienced the contrast of the pain and the suffering. And so it is part of the joy and the pleasure, because without that contrast, you wouldn't have that level of joy and pleasure. So they exist together.
I think, I think this is a really, it could be a triggering or a controversial topic, right? Because what it sounds like you're saying is that war and horror is orgasmic. Mm-hmm. And on one level, we are saying that. Mm-hmm. And on another level, we're saying it's the contrast, right? You don't know what light is until you've seen the darkness. You don't know what love is unless you have hate to compare it to, right? So to experience both, and to the degree, this is one of the mantras that Vanessa came out of this experience with, that you can only experience the highs to the degree that you're willing to go into the lows. So for me, being in denial of my own feelings of unworthiness, I'm suppressing that. So I can't feel the highs of how worthy I actually am until I'm willing to allow my shadow to express the depths of how unworthy I feel. I hope that really lands and makes sense. I want to take a little side quest and talk about existential kink a little bit more, because I think really this really was a really beautiful and in-depth kind of lesson of existential kink. So I want to talk a little bit about what we've been experiencing the past 2 weeks.
Sure. I also want to, you were saying the mantra that came in that moment was, in order to be able to experience ecstatic pleasure, you must be willing to surrender to the ecstatic madness. Mm-hmm. And that moment in the bathroom felt maddening. I really did feel like I was losing my mind. And there was so much resistance to that, because there was that fear that, and there for hours I kept saying, I think I'm broken now. I think I broke my mind somehow. And I think I did. I broke into, I created a new neural pathway. I released maybe some old limiting beliefs and stories. I came into a new understanding. And so there was a part of me that had to die in order for that understanding to be birthed in that moment, or for me to come into the awareness of that. But that, as we were continuing the conversation, Danny and our friend would talk about things they were going through. I think there was a moment where they were like, all right, she's having her own experience. Let's just continue our conversations about what we're feeling. And everything they said, I was clear as day to me. Like, that's all orgasmic. That's all ecstatic. It is part of the pleasure that we get out of that. And so do you want to share what existential kink is?
Yeah, so existential kink is basically a Jungian concept of, you repeat this. The Jung quote is, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life and you'll call it fate. Right. So kind of this idea that your subconscious is helping create the world around you and create your experiences, because it affects your decisions. It affects your thought patterns. It affects your emotions. It affects all of these things. And so unless we're looking at our unconscious, our subconscious, then it's just going to do its thing. And we're going to be like, why do all these bad things happened to me.
Okay, an example is, for example, us having conversations where I can express, hey, I feel hurt by this thing that happened. And Danny could very easily interpret that if he hasn't dealt with his unconscious beliefs, that is an attack to him. Oh, she's always attacking me. She's always being mean to me. She's always calling me a piece of shit. She's always telling me, showing me what a piece of shit I am, as opposed to recognizing, oh, Vanessa feels hurt because Vanessa has her own internal traumas. And I said something that perhaps triggered those traumas or those internal beliefs. And I can hold space for that.
I think we're frozen. If anybody's watching, if you could just type in the comments whether or not you're still seeing us. This automatically shrinks. Where's the camera itself froze?
Oh. Sorry, we were muted.
Sorry, some technical difficulties. Our camera crapped out in the middle of the broadcast, so we had to switch to the laptop camera. So sorry for the quality reduction here. All right, so where were you?
Where was I? Oh my God, I forgot. We were talking about existential kink.
Mm-hmm. So the idea of
that seeing things through those perspectives, seeing things through when we are not dealing with our subconscious, then the subconscious creates a filter through which we see our lives, right? And now it can look like, oh, the world hates me. Vanessa's constantly criticizing me. She's always, bringing up what a piece of shit I am. But if you integrate those insecurities, now it's a whole different experience. Now we can talk about the triggers, we can discuss them. And I mean, as a result, our life has drastically changed. Our circumstances haven't drastically changed, but our view of those circumstances has changed. And so our lives have changed as a result of that.
Absolutely. I want to talk about the example from the past couple of weeks, because I think it'll really help to bring this concept home. So some of you may know that I have been I don't want to say anti-government. I've been a pro-freedom activist, but anti-government oppression. I have been a cop watch activist, a police accountability activist. And so I have a really strong sense of morality and justice when it comes to government and how it treats people. So a couple of weeks ago, we were driving into the city and about to go into the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel, and there's a police checkpoint. And they got the license plate scanners, and they're scanning all the cars as they go through. They're kind of slowing traffic down, and then they're pulling cars out. They pull us over. So I'm like, there's no reason for them to pull us over. So right off the bat, I kind of get this attitude. I'm like, oh, I know what this is. This is like one of these fishing expeditions where they're just going to, try and figure out what they can write tickets for because they're doing a revenue generation campaign. So they pull us over. The cop comes over to the window, and right off the bat, I have an attitude. And I'm like, what? What are you pulling us over for? There's nothing wrong. We didn't do anything wrong. So what are you pulling us over for? I even said to him, it's a fishing expedition, right? You're looking to raise some money, generate some revenue for the city. And the guy was like, sir, your registration is suspended. And I was like, what? That's impossible. No, it's got to be a mistake. No, you're wrong. He actually shows it to me on his phone. He's got the thing that shows it. I was like, so I turned to Vanessa, and so it turns out that we were late with the insurance payment a couple of months ago or a couple of weeks ago. And when I guess we were 2 days late too much.
It lapsed 2 days, yeah.
And so because the insurance lapsed, they automatically cancel the registration. Now we didn't know that. So actually we were driving around without a registration for a while, I guess.
Yeah.
Without realizing it. So anyway, because the registration is canceled in New York City, they impound your car.
They technically ask you to, and they confiscate your plates. So you have to bring your plates back to the DMV.
But because you don't have plates, they won't let you take the car either. So they also impound the car.
Yeah.
So I'm like, fine, whatever. Like I was arguing a little bit. I was like, you don't have to take the car. I showed him that we have current insurance. I'm like, the insurance is good. So it's not really a problem. It's just we'll just go to the DMV and correct it and it won't be an issue. He's like, sorry, I got to take your car anyway. So I'm arguing and he's like, well, you can either surrender the car or I can arrest you and and take the car anyway. So this whole thing, he ends up filling out the paperwork all wrong. Now, essentially, all the document is a receipt for the fact that they took the plates, and we're supposed to bring that receipt to the DMV to prove the NYPD took the plates. They have them. They're going to return them to the DMV. So here's the receipt. We need to re-register the car and get new plates issued. Well, they dated the receipt in the year 2025. Obviously, it's still 2024. So the DMV was like, oh, sorry, we can't take this. The date's wrong. So we're like, well, what are we supposed to do? Well, go to the precinct. So we go to the precinct. To make a long story short, we had to go back and forth between the DMV and precincts, different precincts, because we had to, first we just went to a regular precinct. Then we had to go to the special precinct because it's a special task force that confiscated the car. This whole thing. We must have went back and forth 5 or 6 times.
And nobody knew anything about it. Like the
cops
regular precinct didn't know.
The DMV didn't know. Nobody understood the bureaucracy. Nobody understood the paper. They didn't even know what the paperwork they were looking at. Both the cops and the DMV people, who I would think deal with this all the time, because I'm sure this happens. I mean, the night that we got pulled over, they confiscated at least 50 or 60 cars.
It seemed like a lot of people at the DMV had no idea what was happening. And so I don't know if this is a new thing that they're doing. One of the people at the DMV told me, she was like, they don't take your car for that. And I was like, well, they did. And we came up during this whole experience, we came across a lot of other people who were going through the same issue.
Yeah. So as you can imagine, me with already the bias against government bureaucracy, cops, and how bureaucracy in particular harms poor people the worst, right? So I'm not claiming we're poor in poverty, but I mean, we were late with our insurance payment. It wasn't because we just didn't feel like paying it. Business has not been great. The economy is not great. So, we've been having some struggles. So my temperature, like over the course of the week that it took us to go back and forth and get all this paperwork,
2 weeks.
2 weeks in the end, my temperature is rising and rising. I'm getting more and more frustrated. And like, this is a waste of our time. We're running back, all because this original cop didn't fill out the paperwork correctly. And there was other stuff, other errors on the thing and omissions on the paperwork. So I'm like, all this because this incompetence, both the incompetence of the police, the incompetence of the DMV people. And meanwhile, one of the most aggravating things for me is the cop's badge number is on the receipt. So we go to the precinct. I'm like, could you just call? Because she's like, well, I can't change that. This isn't my report. I don't know. Okay, well, you see his badge number and his name. You could contact him. He's your colleague. You could contact him, confirm, yes, we did that operation on that day, et cetera, et cetera. They didn't even know that that task force was actually NYPD. They were trying to tell us that it was Bridge and Tunnels. And I was like, no, it wasn't. It was NYPD. Look, the badge number's right there. Call him up and just let him confirm the information, and then you know. I can't do that. I was like, you can do that. You won't do that. And at that point, like, I did not say it the way I just said it. I was really fucking aggravated. And I just literally just turned. I didn't even wait for a response. I just turned around and walked out of the precinct because I was so aggravated. All of that to say, okay, we finally go. I'm not even going to tell you how the paperwork got corrected because Fifth Amendment. But the paperwork got corrected, and we finally were able to get new plates issued to us 2 weeks later. We go to the tow company to pick up the car. Guess what? Oh, well, the car's been sitting here for 2 weeks now, so we have to charge you 2 weeks worth of storage fees. It's an extra $1,000. So here's the meat grinder, right? Oh, government bureaucracy just hurting people who are already financially suffering, right? Anybody who's getting their car confiscated because they missed a payment or whatever, they're already being harmed by the economy, and now it's even worse. So now they've jerked us around with their incompetence for 2 weeks, and I have to pay an extra $1,000 for that. Fuming, steam coming out of my ears. The truth is, technology. The truth is that I have a kink. There is a part of me that gets off on feeling morally superior to police and government, and intellectually superior to bureaucrats and cops. Because let's be honest. Let's be honest about the IQ level. I'm sorry if that offends anybody. I'm making a generalization, not all cops. However, they all serve the same stupid system. So, but there it is.
There's the kink.
There's the kink. There's my ego. The parts of me that feel insecure, the parts of me that feel unworthy, that feel inferior, that feel frustrated about that I feel powerless. I was powerless to retrieve my vehicle for 2 weeks, and I knew those storage fees were racking up. I knew it. And I was powerless. So all of that feeling of powerlessness, what is the defense mechanism I use to deal with that? The feeling of moral superiority. I'm better than these cops. They're just oppressors. They are just wanting to bully people. They want to take people's money. They want to, they're enforcing all these oppressive laws. The bureaucrats and government, it's the same thing. I get off. That's the existential kink. So what did my subconscious do? When that cop first came over to that window, when I first got pulled over, had I been nice? Had I not had all the energy of all of that subconscious bias against police and government present, like where I was ready for a fight as soon as he came up to the window, had I just been nice to the cop, maybe he would have filled out the paperwork correctly. Maybe he did it on purpose to punish me for my attitude. And I'm not saying it's right. It's still unjust. He should have done his job. Courtesy, professionalism, and respect. He still should have done his job. But I manifested an experience that I find kinky and pleasurable in a shadow sort of way. So the idea of existential kink is to give the shadow parts of yourself expression. Don't suppress the feelings so that they come out sideways and cause you to manifest experiences like that.
$1,000 lessons.
$1,000 lesson and 2 weeks of aggravation, me not being able to work because I didn't have the car. All of these things as a result of my subconscious bias, me having that kind of nasty interaction with the cop. And I was justified. It is justified, right? I am justified for being angry about bureaucracy and all the hoops they made us jump through, and the fact that it ended up costing us an extra $1,000. And I totally believe that these tow companies that have these contracts with the city, they have the contracts with the NYPD in the city, I know that they do this shit on purpose. They probably lobby all these wacky laws that make you jump through all these hoops, all these stupid, arbitrary regulations for the very purpose of making it hard for people to do what they have to do to get their cars back so that the tow companies make money. And I'm sure they're donating to the politicians and whoever.
Or that they get a cut of that money regardless if there's some kind of agreement.
It's crony capitalism. There's no denying it. I don't need to know the specifics to know that there's some quid pro quo happening here, right? All of my opinions are justified. So there's the nuance, right? It's being okay and it's like being in your sovereignty that yeah, I'm right. And also I don't have to let it trigger me. I don't have to let it aggravate me, stress me out to the point that I am exacerbating the situation, right? If I was just polite and, just like not like I'm surrendering, but I could have even challenged their authority, but in a way that was more empathetic, where I built a bridge of connection with them first. Officer, this really doesn't seem fair, et cetera, right? I could have approached the situation in a different way and maybe had a different outcome.
This is actually something that I have found to be true. And it's a kind of silly, but years ago when I used to work in New Jersey, so I used to take the New Jersey Turnpike all the time, every single morning. And I had gotten pulled. I had a speeding ticket that was like, I had gotten, I don't know, like 4 points on my license or something like that. It was an insane speeding ticket. And then I don't remember if I had like 2 things that had to do with speeding, but I got pulled over on the New Jersey Turnpike, and the state trooper came up to me and he said, he's like, did you realize that you were driving at, this however many miles per hour? And I was like, no, officer, I didn't realize this. He's like, where are you going to work? Okay, can I have your driver's license? I gave him the driver's license. He's like, is there anything I need to know? I said, I have a speeding ticket from this date and a speeding ticket from that date. And he looked at me and I was like, I'm sorry. And he was like, okay. Those were things he was going to look up anyway. I knew that they were going to come up, so I didn't have to pretend. But honestly, I just, I said this, I've gotten pulled over for speeding these 2 times. And the truth is, if he gave me a ticket that day, he would have had to take my car. I knew that. I was honestly really afraid that was going to happen. And he came back and he said, you know what? I'm just going to let you go with a warning. Please slow down. I was like, all right, I will. Thank you. And I took off. But, it is the energy of that. I know what the consequences are. I knew that I was getting pulled over for speeding. I knew that I had these issues already. I knew that I had points on my license, and that if he gave me a ticket for speeding again, I was going to lose my license and he was going to have to take my car. And so I could have had an attitude with him. I could have been nasty to him. I could have, gotten, our technical difficulties today are Danny's new kink.
Yeah, this is my kink. Getting aggravated about technology.
But again, it's the energy that you go into it with. And so, yeah, he gave me, I was actually only a few months away from having those points cleared. So I think he realized, like, okay, if she just calms down for the next couple of months, she'll be fine. But there's a difference in how you react to things, right? And even through this whole process, it was interesting because I also have lessons there. My kink is my boundary issue. I have a very difficult, I have a hard time with boundaries. And so a lot of times I end up in situations.
Wait, what do you mean by you have a hard time with boundaries? Be more clear.
I have a hard time setting boundaries. So when Danny's enforcing boundaries, yes, I set boundaries, but I have a hard time enforcing boundaries. And so in this situation, like when we were in the car, I did tell Danny, like, can you just calm down, please? I wore a bodysuit to my mushroom journey. Yes, I'm reading the comments. Sorry. So there are moments when I do get frustrated by how Danny responds, and I think one of the biggest boundaries that I've come to is that if I'm in the car with you, you have to find ways to keep me safe also, right? Your attitude, your anger, your lack of embodiment creates issues not just for you but for me also, because the car is in my name, so I had to deal with all of these issues. I had to do a lot of the dealing with the DMV. When he walked out of the precinct, I still had to finish the conversation with the police officer. So there are all these ways in which I'm being affected, but I don't enforce my boundaries. So I think after we picked up the car, we had this like little argument in the car, and I just started crying suddenly. After 2 weeks, I said, finally, I'm allowing myself to feel everything, because for 2 weeks I had to keep it together because you were having these strong, intense emotions. And so I realized I don't have to carry it all myself. I don't have to take it on myself. I can set a boundary. And I did. I said, I'm setting this boundary. I need you to make sure that your actions are not affecting me as well, because they do. Your attitude, I mean, if you want to believe that the cop did it because you were nasty to him, then that not only affected you, but it affected me too. And so we need to set and hold proper boundaries. I need to enforce those boundaries. So that was a huge lesson for me also. And that is my kink. It's very easy for me to blame somebody else for the way I feel. Oh, Danny, that's where my suppressed emotions are, because I didn't deal with my frustration or my anger for those 2 weeks. I was kind of suppressing it. There were moments where I was dealing with the anxiety about it, but really the anxiety was the unprocessed anger, the unprocessed frustration. And so I was triggered by Danny's frustration and anger because I wasn't allowing myself to feel it. Mm. And that's my kink.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's the existential kink of it. By the way, a great book. Highly recommend Existential Kink by Carolyn Elliott. It's a really novel and interesting way of looking at your subconscious. That makes it a little bit more exciting than maybe reading Jung, right?
There was a point that Carolyn Elliott makes in the book where, at the time of the writing of the book, the number one shows on television were Game of Thrones and The Walking Dead, which are both really apocalyptic, like end of the world, somebody's always dying, really intense shows. Why do we like that? Why were those the number one shows? Because deep down, we desire to fear for our lives. That is what gives us the joy and experience and pleasure of living, is to know that we could lose that. We were recently talking with a friend about our DMT experience a few years ago, where working with DMT, it's a very quick journey, but it feels like life just you get pulled out of life.
It feels like, for me, it felt like being in heaven. And so while I was floating in heaven, floating in love, there was a part of me that, like, I was enjoying it. It was blissful, but a part of me was so afraid that I was going to get stuck there and I wouldn't be able to return to Earth. Think about that for a moment. Imagine you're finally floating in heaven in this complete, like,
eternal love
and bliss, and wanting to get back to Earth. You know, I know that we, as a collective, as a society, at least in the United States or in Western countries, we like to complain about how horrible this timeline is, and the final season of the United States is going to be lit. Like all these memes, right, where we're complaining about life. But the truth is, we want to be here. We want to be here. We want to be experiencing these things. Now, in our spiritual beliefs, that's because we are all part of God, right? Our souls decided to come to earth because they were bored of floating in endless love all the time. We wanted to experience something else. This also comes from an Alan Watts lecture, which he pulls from a lot of Eastern spiritual traditions. These concepts from Hindu mythology, right? Like humanity being the drama of God. We're all characters being played by God. We like to use the Fortnite analogy, right? Our souls are playing a video game of Danny and Vanessa, and what crazy adventures and what challenges are we going to play while we're in this game?
Sign up for you.
Yeah, and then eventually that character is going to get killed off, and we're going to reboot as a new character, right? So this is kind of like the Hindu mythology. So this idea that we're spirit having a human experience, right? And it's like the way Alan Watts talks about it. He says, you know, if you're living, if you're God and you can have any experience you want because you can create anything you want. He's like, you're going to create all the most amazing experiences. And then, you know, after maybe a few thousand years of creating all the most amazing experiences, you're going to say, let me try something different. Let me try feeling lonely. Let me try feeling sad. Let me try feeling depressed. Let's see what that feels like. And then realizing, oh, when I feel depressed, it makes me appreciate when I'm happy, when I'm joyful.
Let me play this game where I pretend that I don't have any power, right? Where I'm not God,
the creator of the universe.
Who has the ability to create any experience. I'm going to play a scenario where I have no power, where I'm just a human having to do human things and pay bills and get my car impounded and have to go argue with the DMV and the NYPD.
Yeah. Or be a cockroach.
Or
whatever.
Whatever other being you choose to be and whatever other experience you choose to have. And honestly, I think seeing life that way has allowed me to not take everything so seriously.
Or so personally.
And to allow myself to have feelings too. Because what happens is we suppress it. Oh, I'm not supposed to feel anger. I'm not supposed to feel sadness. I'm not supposed to, we fear depression. And I think the reason why people get depressed is because they think they shouldn't be sad, right? We're moving into the winter months where it gets darker earlier, and people sometimes feel sad and they're like, I shouldn't feel sad. This is bad. I shouldn't feel this way.
Let me take a pill.
It should be sunny all the time, and I should always be able to be at the beach. And whatever stories, stories you have about it. But what if you surrendered to the sadness? What if you allowed yourself to explore what the sadness is about? What about this time of the year makes you sad? For a long time, it took me a few years to figure out why I would get very melancholic during Christmas. I had a miscarriage back in 2008, and my due date was around Christmas. So it took me years to figure out why it was so difficult, why I would always get upset during Christmas. I would get upset when we were decorating the Christmas tree, when we were like putting up apartment decorations and getting ready for the holidays. I would get really angry. I would get angry if I wanted to do holiday things and Xander wasn't interested or Danny wasn't really excited about it. It would really upset me, but I had no idea why, because for years I suppressed that sadness. I didn't allow myself to go into that. Once I started acknowledging it, it became very different, where I was honoring those feelings instead, and it was no longer overwhelming because I wasn't resisting it anymore. I could allow the feeling to come through me. Yeah, I'm feeling this sadness. I'm feeling this loss. I'm feeling this grief, and I can just move through it, and it's okay. But the more we suppress these emotions, the harder it is to deal with them. And that's when we get into chronic depression, chronic sadness, really numbing ourselves out because we're not allowing ourselves to feel those difficult emotions. And honestly, I've realized that the more that I allow myself to feel them, the more it opens up for me to explore other emotions in my body, because now I've cleared these things that I wasn't allowing myself to move through. And now there are new pathways that I can choose and feel into.
And if you look at somatic science, you'll find that when you're holding on to these emotions, the stuff that's suppressed in your body, it makes you ill. The Body Keeps the Score is a really great book that talks about the science of somatics and how we are storing trauma. We're storing all these suppressed emotions in our myofascial tissue, and how that ends up creating physical illness if it's not properly dealt with. So all of these are really important concepts that we're kind of pulling together just through our different studies of all these different areas. And it's really exciting because our life continues to evolve in such a beautiful way. Mm-hmm. And our life is much more enjoyable. You know, someone said to me a few weeks ago, your teenage self would think you're so cool today. And I thought about it for a minute. I'm like, oh my God, yeah. Like me in high school, looking at my life now, first of all, would have never imagined it. And second of all, like, holy shit, I'm gonna end up being really cool. Remember in Back to the Future where he's like, what happens to me and my kids? Do we become total assholes? And it's like the opposite. Well, you became an asshole for a little while, but then you transmuted it and became not an asshole. I can still be an asshole sometimes.
Yes.
But it's all part of the existential kink.
You own all of it.
But now I own all of it. Yeah. I hold that polarity of I can be an asshole and I can be an amazing person too.
Yeah. Because of your ability to be an asshole is that your ability to be an amazing person or a compassionate person, right? If I'm not willing to accept my darkness, my worst behaviors, it's going to be easy for me to judge other people. And I think that's where a lot of judgments come from when we try to reject those parts of ourselves. We all have the innate ability to be a jerk, to be an asshole, to be judgmental.
This is what I've been saying about Trump. You know, we did, back when Trump was president the first time, we did a podcast episode called Healing Your Inner Trump. And I have been saying this for the people that hate Trump. I hate a lot of things about Trump. I hesitate to say that I hate him because I don't want to hate anybody. But yeah, he pisses me off. But the things about Trump that trigger me are things that I don't like about myself, right? The parts of myself that I want to deny. I'm not capable of being like Trump. I'm not capable of being like a cop or a government bureaucrat. But the truth is, I am capable of doing it. I mean, ask Vanessa. In our life, we have talked ad nauseum in this podcast about how when we were alcoholics and before we started doing our healing work, I was emotionally abusive. So I was like the equivalent of a cop emotionally in our relationship, bullying her when she would have emotions that I didn't think were valid or right, bullying her into surrendering those emotions or suppressing them, really, is what I was doing. So I have been that exists inside me. All polarity exists inside me. So I am capable of being evil and I am capable of being loving.
Yep.
And all of a sudden the camera decided to come back on.
We all carry all of those archetypes, all of those possibilities. They just manifest differently. And I think the real work is in recognizing that in each and every one of the people we come across.
And we will never be free collectively of Trump, Netanyahu, Biden, of all of these tyrants. We'll never be free of them until we heal the Trump, Netanyahu, and Biden within us. Then we will stop having to manifest these tyrants to reflect back to us the tyranny that lives inside of us. So I think, is that a good place to wrap up for today?
Good place to wrap up.
Okay. So that's the existential kink lesson of like embracing the ecstatic madness, because that could be considered your inner Trump is part of the ecstatic madness, right? That chaos. But when we transmute, when we alchemize, we create order out of chaos.
Yep. A couple of other things that came up during that ceremony were you can do hard things.
Mm-hmm.
It's all ecstatic. And I think if you really can find the ecstatic pleasure in all of your experiences, it relieves so much from you. And what was the last one?
You always have a choice.
And you always have a choice. Yes.
You always have a choice how you respond to something. There's no obligation, right? We may feel obligated because of societal pressures, because of our parents' expectations of us, whatever it is. But you always have a choice. Always. That's what free will is. You're a sovereign being and you always have a choice how and why and when you engage. So yeah, that's a really great takeaway as well. You know, there's one thing that I did not mention, and I think we can just wrap up with this because this will make it a little bit more lighthearted. When during the mushroom ceremony, when we summoned Dionysus, Vanessa came into the room and she's laying there naked and having this orgasmic experience. And in my mind, I mentioned like thinking, oh, well, Dionysus was having these orgies. Is that what's going to happen? And do you know that I heard a voice audible in my ear say, do not touch her. This is a holy moment. And if you touch her, you're going to take attention. You're going to bring the attention to you. You're going to be taking from her experience. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh my God, that's lesson number one about holding space is to not take, to be there, to support, to protect, to create the container, but not to take from that experience. And I mean, I was floored for me to hear that voice. And, you know, I believe it was Dionysus, and whether Dionysus came out of my subconscious or is an actual spirit or deity, I don't think really matters, right? I learned the lesson. I learned my first lesson on how to really hold space for the ecstatic madness. So
yeah, good job.
Thank you so much for watching. We really love and appreciate you guys. We would love to hear comments, your thoughts. Drop a comment underneath the podcast or on whichever app you're watching on. Stay tuned. Next week, we are going to have a great friend of ours, Layla. She's going to come on and talk to us about human design. Human design is a new kind of brings together psychology and astrology. And it's a really interesting system. And it's incredible how when you get readings with these systems, how they really like do match up with your actual like,
and they give you a different
energy.
Give you a different lens through which to see your personality traits. I mean, I think we all, like I said, we all embody all of the archetypes, just in different
proportions,
and ratios. And so it's really interesting to see what energies are influential to your life and how you can leverage them instead of resisting them.
Amen.
So I'm really excited. I love Layla.
Yeah, so stay tuned for that, and we will see you next week. Thank you all.
Happy Sovereign Sunday.
Happy Sovereign Sunday.